Found it difficult to get a job when you were younger? I certainly found it tough. I put in my resume at Big W and at Donut King and all the places down in Orange Shopping Mall where I was living, and basically got nothing, heard nothing. It goes into a big stack and you just feel so deflated and defeated. And the only way that I got my first job was to tell my dad, and Dad rang a mate of his that owned a service station. So I got it through that way, and Dad didn't like doing it, I didn't like doing it, it was embarrassing, but that's how I got my first start. And I thought I was very lucky to have had that connection. Well, in our region, we have an unusually high percentage of youth unemployment. In fact, it sits at just over 19%. And apparently getting a job is getting increasingly difficult for young people. So how do we give kids a helping hand as a society? One local academic suggests that communities can play a critical role in encouraging and enabling young people to find work, especially when it comes to connections between them, their families, or other community members. Dr. David Ferrangia is a sociologist and lecturer at the University of Newcastle. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming on the program today. Maybe you could outline, why do you think connections between young people and their community is so important when it comes to finding work?
Well, there are a few reasons, but I think the first thing we need to keep in mind is that work is not really just about getting money or making a living. The kind of work that young people look for is really a factor in their overall kind of sense of self. Young people tend to look for jobs that they see as doable and possible for someone like them. So looking for work is not just about looking for money, it's also kind of looking for a particular kind of identity. And the possibilities that young people see for themselves are really kind of deeply embedded within networks of relationships. And these relationships provide examples of the kinds of work that might be doable, and they provide, in a sense, possibilities for the kinds of futures that young people can imagine for themselves. And so in navigating the labour market, young people, in a sense, are kind of reflecting what the communities they're embedded within provide to them as resources and as examples.
So, if your family comes from a medical background, you have a father that's a doctor or an uncle that's a doctor, then you're more likely to kind of try and navigate that path to employment. Or if your parents or work in the mines or families work in the mines, then it's that kind of thing that'll lead you, or trades. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's right. The medical profession is a really great example of that. There's a very strong kind of intergenerational aspect with that. And in our region, what's happening is that the labour market in general, and the youth labour market in particular, has changed very rapidly over the last couple of decades and will continue to change very rapidly as well. Young people are navigating an environment that is perhaps unfamiliar to previous generations, who are working very hard to support young people, but often the responsibility to kind of navigate this fairly rapidly changing environment falls to the young person themselves.
Why is that? Why has that change happened? Why is it more unfamiliar? Is that due to technology or just changing labour markets?
Well, the big story here really is globalization, and the way that Australia's increasing openness to the dynamics of the global economy has impacted differently on different labour markets. So what we find is that youth unemployment, elevated levels of youth unemployment, have been a feature of developed economies for a number of decades now. But this is distributed differently in different places, and the reason for that is connected with the way that the industries that support those places and that support those local labour markets have changed as a result of globalization. So there has been very rapid change in Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, connected with changes in manufacturing, changes in the extractive industries, and it's those kinds of rapid changes that have confronted young people with a fairly complex and insecure labour market environment.
We did an interview on this program just a couple of weeks ago about the importance of STEM jobs. I didn't even really know what STEM was. Science, technology, engineering and mechanics, is it the last one?
Maths, I believe.
Maths, yeah, maths. So, and the importance to have young people more involved in this STEM economy, dealing with those subjects. We also hear a lot about this knowledge-based economy. Are these words and phrases something that young people can easily engage with, or is it a bit off-putting because they don't have those mentors in their life who are engaged with these industries?
Well, for our region, I think what's important to note is that the knowledge economy, which is something that we hear a lot about from politicians, we're all encouraged to engage with the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy is located really in big cities, our big metropolitan centres like places like Sydney and Melbourne. Those places have at least benefited disproportionately from the emergence of this kind of high-tech knowledge economy. So for young people outside those cities who maintain strong connections with their own local communities, there's a bit of a dilemma there. Not only that, but the promise of a job in the knowledge economy is really bound up with engagement with higher education. But there's a fairly kind of complex landscape there, because while we have more educated young people than we have ever had, a degree is no longer such a straightforward pathway into a good, well-paid, secure job. In fact, there's a kind of term floating around called educational inflation, which is, the more degrees that we have circulating through the labour market, the less these degrees are really worth, even though a degree is still, a very valuable thing for a young person to have. So the promise of work in the knowledge economy is really something that only makes sense for a very particular kind of young person, a young person who is well educated and who is located within a geographical region that offers those kinds of jobs.
Can you help define the knowledge economy for me? Is it just a shift away from blue-collar work?
That's part of it. I mean, the knowledge economy is a somewhat amorphous term. Politicians like it a lot more than sociologists. But the basic idea is the shift away from work that is involved in the material manufacture of an object or a particular product, and towards work that is about using specialist knowledge, and often using specialist knowledge to generate more specialist knowledge, which can then be put to work in high-tech industries.
Right, okay. So this is a very broad picture of why we're having a comprehensive view of why we might have a 19% unemployment rate here in the Hunter. So how can a community help young people adapt to this changing environment?
This is the big question. I think, first of all, that we need to be very careful that we don't lay the blame for youth unemployment at the feet of communities, and certainly not at the feet of young people themselves. In the research that I and my colleagues have done, what we see is young people and their networks around them working really hard to get to grips with a very kind of complex labour market environment. And that's the same for the people who provide young people with advice, such as training organisations and those kinds of things. So I think it's important that we don't rely entirely on communities to shoulder the burden as a result of changes which are really outside of any of our hands. That said, I would think that becoming involved with local networks is a good thing for young people to do. Looking through the kinds of social connections that they might have, and drawing on those kinds of connections to imagine a life in work that looks meaningful to them. That's really that's the role that communities are playing.
So think about who you are and what you would like to be doing, what your interests are, and then try and align yourself with what networks of people that are involved in that type of work?
Yeah, that's right. And look, I have to say that the research that shows that young people are, in fact, already engaged in this task. Young people are aware of the complexity that they're facing. They have a lot of people giving them advice, and there is a lot of kind of active work that young people are currently doing to find work, to navigate the labour market and to reflect on the kind of work that seems meaningful to them. So in a sense, I think what's needed is, as much as anything else, a recognition of the work that young people are already doing.
It doesn't sound like there's any silver bullet answer to solving the unemployment rate here in the Hunter then anytime soon.
Well, we should always be very careful of silver bullets,
Yeah.
particularly in an area as complex as this one.
David, thank you very much for that comprehensive overview. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. David Ferrugia, he's a sociologist and lecturer at the University of Newcastle.